My name is Dr. Johanna Rogers. I'm the Vice President for Racial Equity and Social Impact, and I'm excited to be here with my colleagues today to facilitate and moderate the conversation that we're going to have. Just to kind of set your expectations for today, we're going to have a welcome by our sponsor, Berkshire Bank, and then I will introduce our panelists, and each of them have prepared a short presentation to talk about how they are addressing matters related to race and women in the workplace. Following their presentations, we'll have a short moderated Q&A, and then we're going to open up the lines for you all to ask questions and dig in a bit more on this topic. So hopefully you showed up not only prepared to listen, but also eager to engage in a conversation about what the challenges are and how we can work collectively as a community to address them. Okay, and so without further ado, I would like to introduce Berkshire Bank, our regional leader, Chris, for a short welcome, and thank you to them.
Thank you, Juhanna, and good morning. And on behalf of Berkshire Bank and my fellow colleagues, let me also welcome you to the second panel discussion of CO CenterState's Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Initiative. Joining me on the call today is our Central New York Regional Community and Volunteer Liaison, Jennifer Hunt, as well as Berkshire Bank's new Chief Diversity Officer, Angela Dixon. Angela is headquartered in our Albany region, but will be working across the footprint. And some of you may know her from her extensive DI experience in that market. We look forward to her collaboration with Dr. J and Rob in CenterState going forward. Diversity, equity, inclusion are a cornerstone of Berkshire's own core values and our strategic direction. The bank, through our foundation, is making similar investments throughout our footprint, and our multi-year partnership with CenterState, Rob and Dr. Rogers, is one of our largest grants. We're very proud of that. Lastly, I would also like to mention that I'm very honored that Dr. J has recently joined my Central New York Advisory Council. I'm looking forward to today's discussion, and as Dr. J said, I encourage everyone to engage our distinguished panel today. So I think this morning will be a really great event, and thank you for having me, Dr. Rogers.
Thank you, Chris, for not only acknowledging the work, but believing in it and creating the space for us to do some amazing work. Berkshire is also the sponsor of our CenterState CEO Equity website that we started, where the equity pledge is currently up, and we're encouraging many of you to join us in our efforts to tackle issues related to equity, not just here in this panel, but throughout our work as a community and overall as a region. And so Berkshire has been critical in us being able to make that happen, so as well as the panel today. So thank you so much, Chris and Jen and the team, and welcome to the new diversity officer. I heard a lot about her and look forward to meeting her. As we get started, and before I introduce the panelists, I, again, am Dr. Rogers. Some folks refer to me as Dr. J. And this has been a really amazing year for us to really think about how we can help our membership as well as the community think more critically about racial equity. Some folks would say, you know, how did CenterState really get here? And I think the story starts long before I arrived, but I think the important parts just to highlight is that the matters of race and equity and the work that we're doing around social impact is really shaped by not just my professional experience, but I'm also a trained racial expert and scholar, and spent a lot of years prior to arriving in Syracuse working with school districts, communities, and universities, and thinking about strategies to help students, faculty, as well as community leaders think more critically about our past and how it connects to our present. And the current role, I think, is laying out the opportunity for me to layer that experience with my community as well as business experience, and helping us all think about ways that we can be a bit more assertive when it comes to thinking about the ways in which race and equity intersect with our workplace. And so this month, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of gender. Over the last year, exactly, us as a community has been, and a nation has been, responding to the global pandemic. And we have seen how the causes of shutdowns, closures has really intersected with various communities, one being that of communities of color, but also thinking about the impact it has made on women, right? And the roles that they play. Women in the workplace isn't a new issue when we talk about ways in which equity and social impact need to be thought about in workspaces. Over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of conversation about matters related to maternity leave, gender representation at leadership tables. We've talked about the way in which women are positioned within organizations. We have also talked about one that has been really, really impactful to me is the way in which women show up. Hair in the workplace has been another topic that has gone to even the highest court in the land when we think about the ways that race and gender intersect in the workplace. And so I thought, this being Women's History Month, but also with the current conversation we're having when we look at the data related to women in the job loss and what's happening with women in the workplace as it's related to this pandemic. And workplace, I'm thinking about on various levels. I thought it was a most appropriate time for our organization to bring the community together and talk about what has been some historic challenges, right, that are not new, but how our current situation is exacerbating, I think, some of the challenges that we haven't addressed in our past. And so I've invited some colleagues, friends, and new leaders that I've met over the last couple of months here to help us think about the experiences of women in the workplace and what we can do in our community differently, questions we could ask ourselves, but also give us some context on how we can address some of the challenges and barriers in a more equitable way. So without further ado or belaboring the point, I'm going to introduce our panel. Our first presenter today, Charlene Tarver, is a Syracuse native who is currently residing in Phoenix, Arizona, who has not only spoken about diversity, equity, inclusion, racial wealth gap, and income disparity issues, but she's done a great job of leading efforts in Arizona to help address these inequities as it's been exacerbated, I would say, again, due to COVID-19 matters. And so Charlene is an author, a professor, former practicing attorney, and public policy advocate, and is also founder and CEO of the Women's Economic Institute. She holds a legal master's in taxation and a certification in employee benefits law from Georgetown University Law Center, as well as a Juris Doctorate from the University of Buffalo School of Law. Without further ado, I'm presenting to you Charlene Tarver for her thoughts on race and women in the workplace.
Good morning. I am very excited to be with you all. It's a little early here. I'm actually in Phoenix, Arizona, and it's a little after 6 a.m. So you probably will see the daylight rise or the sunrise behind me. So I'm happy to be here with you all. Very excited to talk about this topic. First, I'd like to thank Dr. J for the invitation. Thank you for the that you're doing with CenterState CEO, President Rob Simpson. Thank you so much for your leadership on this critical issue. And Berkshire Bank, thank you for making the investment so that the message can be disseminated. It's very critical that we have these types of partnerships so that we can really look at meaningful ways to engage racial equality and racial equity. So I am going to, I've actually kind of created a PowerPoint presentation. We're going to walk through that and then be available for any questions that might exist. So the topic today is racial equity and social impact. And we're going to talk a little bit about kind of what that really means. So when we talk about racial equity, what is racial equity? It's equal opportunity to all people, irrespective of race, color, creed, ethnicity, or religion, distribution of resources and opportunities that are independent of racial bias. So it's inclusion of all people, cultures, and identities, and treating and viewing them as valuable, equal to equal, and making sure that there is equal access. What is social impact? It's the effect of race, racism on community, culture, and the well-being of individuals and families. And so when we formed the Women's Economic Institute in 2017, our goal was really to look at ways that we could really represent the interest of women of color and make sure that there was economic sustainability. We are a policy technical assistance institute with a focus on professional development for women entrepreneurs of color and also girls. When we talk about entrepreneurs or entrepreneurship, what does that actually mean? Those are women who accept the risk of starting and running a business or an enterprise, and it could include inventions and tech-oriented products and services or not. So entrepreneur in the context in which we're using it with the Women's Economic Institute is really about women having a place where they're able to actually start a business and create generational wealth. Why do women become entrepreneurs? 1, opportunity. 2, profit. 3, independence. So as we walk through the slides, we're going to get into a little bit more depth about what opportunity, profit, and independence actually mean. But I think on first blush, they're fairly self-explanatory. Opportunity means women are no longer limited by the glass ceiling. They're no longer limited in terms of the titles or access to the C-suite. They're no longer limited in terms of the roles that they can play in management, because as entrepreneurs, they're able to drive and dictate those opportunities for themselves. In terms of profit, we do know that there is a pay gap in the US. We'll talk a little bit more about that. There's also a wealth and income gap, which is exacerbated by both gender and race. And so profit allows women, this entrepreneurial realm allows women to determine what their profit will be, and then how they're able to actually, again, generate generational wealth and look at wealth building, wealth transfer, overall well-being. Independence. There is a lot of discrepancy within the workplace in terms of bias and how bias impacts a woman's ability to navigate through some of the systems and structures that exist. And so entrepreneurism gives women the ability to determine what their work schedule looks like, when they'll have children, whether they'll marry, and how that impacts their overall quality of life. So entrepreneurism really gives women freedom. So why is there such a spike in women entrepreneurs? Some of what we've already touched on or highlighted: unconscious bias toward women, increased poverty amongst communities of color, racial and gender wealth and income gap exist. Women's earnings further decrease with age. I bet you didn't know that. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Women with children are also more likely to be penalized in the job market. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. What's the wealth gap? So in 2019, the median Black household net wealth was approximately $24,000. That's 90% less than the median white household income. In 2019, for single Black women, the median net wealth was, guess what? $7,000. So net wealth is a combination of all of your assets minus any of your liabilities. So the total value, if you will, of your household, of your life. So the average Black woman, single Black woman, her net wealth was approximately $7,000. What does the data show when we really talk about race and gender? What does the data suggest? So we know that there is increased poverty, especially amongst communities of color. So just want to kind of walk through a little bit of the Black concentrated poverty. And so if we look at kind of concentration of poverty, we looked at kind of the top states, cities and states where we're seeing this concentrated poverty amongst African Americans. Syracuse is at 65.2%. Detroit is at 57.6%, and then you see where the numbers go down. We actually have a higher concentrated poverty than Rochester, New York does for African Americans. Let's look at Hispanic concentrated poverty. Syracuse is at 62.2%, and Detroit is at 51.1%. And so we don't have the numbers for Rochester because they're not showing up in the top 5 cities or states with concentrated Hispanic poverty. Let's look at white poverty. White poverty, ironically, Syracuse is at the bottom of the top 5 at 21.5%. So we're seeing this huge disparity just in terms of concentrated poverty within the city of Syracuse. And if you lay that over a national blueprint or a national map, you're seeing that whites are faring much better in Syracuse than their African-American and their Hispanic counterparts are. And I think you're very aware of that given the 2010 data that came out that suggested that 47.4% of Black children, as well as Hispanic children, are growing up in concentrated poverty in Syracuse, New York. So let's talk a little bit about how we actually, some of the other factors that actually play into this increase in entrepreneurism. So one of the issues is the increased poverty. I also mentioned the equal pay. So there is a pay gap between Black women as well as white women, but really Black women and their white male counterparts. So I'm going to take a look at what the numbers suggest. Okay, but before we go into the numbers, let me just tell you a little bit about what equal pay is. So each year we celebrate the Equal Pay Day. And the Equal Pay Day is simply the number of days that a woman has to work into the new year in order to earn what a male earned in the previous year. And so we know that women are making on average about 82 cents per dollar. This is women in totality. So women are earning about 82 cents for every dollar earned by a man. But what we've done is we've actually calculated how many days into the new year a woman has to work in order to make up that difference between $1 and 82 cents. And this again is for white women. So let's look at the actual numbers. The first here is, again, I mentioned all women. All women have to work into March 24th, 2021 to earn what white males earned on December 31st of 2020. For Asian women, it's a little bit higher, skewing at about 85 cents on the dollar. Let's look at African American women and Native American women. African American women, their equal pay day comes on August 3rd. And for Native American women, it's September 8th. And so let's look at the difference in terms of the actual amount that they earn on the dollar. So Black women are earning 63 cents for every dollar earned by a white male. And Native American women are earning 60 cents. Latina women are earning 55 cents. Okay, we also see that we have increased graduation rates amongst women. And so I'm going to try to move a little bit quicker through this. We see that women are leading in terms of associate's degrees, bachelor's degrees, master's, and doctorate degrees. A lot of our data is pre-COVID-19. These numbers are going to shift significantly as a result of COVID-19. I think the situation will be even more dire. But just looking at the increase in graduation rates, that would suggest that women would have equal pay. They would have pay parity. Unfortunately, that's not what it suggests. We see that in 2013, 140 women were graduating to every 100 men. So it's not that women had an education deficit. It's unfortunately that women were not receiving equal pay for their work, and that is leading more women into the entrepreneurial realm. Okay, have a few Black women stats. Black woman high school graduate earns as much as a white male dropout with a 9th grade education. Black woman with a BA earns, or Black women with a BA earn about $10,000 less than white men with an associate's degree. It takes nearly 2 Black women college graduates to earn what the average white male college graduate earns by himself. And then more than 4 million family households in the US are headed by Black women. 35% of those family households live below the poverty level, and more than 1.4 million of those households are headed by Black women who live in poverty. So this is kind of a snapshot of the gender wage gap as it varies from state to state. So I don't have a marker here, but if you look at the top of, right in the center, you'll see 70% is the worst, and that's that lighter color. 90% is better, and that's the darker color. So if you look to see where Arizona is, we're a little bit, we're kind of between the 70 and the 90. But look at where you are in New York. You're closer to the red, to the better. Now, where Syracuse falls on that map, I'm not certain. I have not done the analytics to really be able to speak to that. But clearly, New York State is a state that is ripe for a decreased gap amongst women, which makes it attractive for entrepreneurial opportunities as well as business opportunities for the state. Okay, so you are amongst one of the top states in terms of the wage gap for women. Overall, Black and Hispanic women face the biggest pay gap when compared to white men. So I wanted you to take a look at the annual earnings. If we look at white men, the annual earnings, we're looking at it where a white male makes about $57.9 thousand or $57,900. Look at where Hispanic women are, $31,000. Here's Black women, $36,000. Okay, so this is that equal pay gap that we were talking about. And so this is how this looks kind of in terms of weekly pay. Think about how much more women could afford in terms of childcare, education, housing, being able to purchase a car, afford a loan, if they were to receive that full $57,000 in salary. So this pay gap is hurting women significantly. Also, women with children are penalized while men with children appear to be rewarded. Well, what does that mean? That means if we look at weekly earnings for women with and without children, look at that. Women with no children are making about $746 weekly compared to women with children, $756. So they're on par with one another. But let's look at men. Men with no children are earning about $861, and men with children are earning about $1,013. So if we look at women with no children, or women with children, $756, versus men with children, $1,013, you're talking about almost a $300 difference weekly. The challenge, especially for Black women, is that many Black women are breadwinners for their families. And so men are being paid higher because they are breadwinners. They're perceived that way. And these are some old, very stereotypical norms in our society. And those norms have evolved and changed because our culture has changed and the makeup of the Black family has changed. And so when we look at this, essentially women with children are being treated as, are being penalized and treated differently in terms of how they are recruited, promoted, and then also their compensation. Women's earnings also decrease with age while men's keep increasing. So if we look at this 16 to 24, the red are women, the blue are men. We see where they are at age 16 to 24. Look at where they are at 25 to 34. Let's go to 35 to 44. And then once we hit this 45 to 54, women start to level out. In fact, they decrease a little bit. Look at what happens at ages 55 to 64. Men are increasing in their weekly earnings. Women begin to drop. Look at what happens at 65 plus. Same thing, men drop a little bit, but there still is not that $250 a week drop that we're seeing for women. Okay. Then there's the number of women promoted to the highest levels of companies. Okay, so this is revealing an unconscious bias. Okay, if we look at the lightest shade, this is going to be women of color. So we see women of color coming in at an entry level in these entry level positions at about 17%. However, when we get to the C-suite, look at where women of color are, 3%. So 3% of women of color are promoting to the C-suite compared to 67% of white males. Just 37 women CEOs led companies on the 2020 Fortune 500 list. That's less than 8%. However, this is the highest number. Actually, the number's a little bit higher now for 2021. That was the highest number for the Forbes list or the Fortune list since 1955. And women CEOs are still getting paid at a fraction of what their male counterparts earn. Okay, we'll skip over, I think, kind of what the numbers show because I am significantly over time, but I do want to go through kind of some of the strategies for how we can actually empower women employees, and even entrepreneurs of color. Mentoring, leadership development, technical support, education and workforce readiness for girls, internships, apprenticeship programs, and then creating very diverse partnerships. Okay, so how do you pipeline employees into your company? Perhaps that's partnering with an HBCU, partnering with a historically Black organization to create an actual internship or apprenticeship program, working with African-American women entrepreneurs that can come in and partner with and mentor employees, forming your own employee-based development program. Okay. Also, I want to highlight just a couple of statistics that came from the Goldman Sachs Womenomics report, and it's actually just released 2021, and it's Black Womenomics. And so they're really talking about how do we address equity specific to Black women. And so there were a couple of areas that they covered, and we'll probably get into this a little bit later with Q&A. But I want to just highlight a few. One is earning gaps. So how do we create more advantage for disadvantaged African-American women? Okay, you enforce pay equity laws, raise the minimum wage, target workforce development, set aspirational goals to hire Black women, and then create affirmative support through mentoring. And then we definitely want to move toward pay equity. Capital access gap. So this is another gap that they've identified. Raising the child tax credit, enforcing fair lending laws, enforcing equity of public lending programs, increase business loans to Black women, increase investment in Black women's businesses. Many people don't know this, but Black women are opening or establishing businesses at 6 times the national average. They're earning only $28,000 annually. And that is in large part because they lack personal financial access, and then they also lack access to capital. So they don't have income, and they also don't have access to capital and lines of credit to establish those businesses and scale up those businesses. We also want to increase investment in Black women's businesses, combine capital access with mentoring, increase access to banking and banking products. And then we also have the housing gap. So how do we address the housing gap? How do we close that? Invest in neighborhoods and schools serving Black communities, enforce fair lending and fair housing laws, invest in affordable housing, and encourage mixed income and mixed race environments. Okay, and then this is my last slide. And I actually have a book that I've written, so I'm not going to do any promotions here, but I'm looking forward to your questions. I'll turn it back over to you, Dr. J.
Charlene, thank you so much for that. Amazing. I mean, even some of the data I'm very familiar with, but I think in this context, laying it out in such a succinct way is really going to help, I think, the next part of the program as we dive into, how women have navigated these spaces, or encouraging more women to navigate certain spaces related to the arts or the entertainment industry or even higher education. So thank you for that. I know there are probably a bunch of questions that folks, if you can have a moment to just jot some of those down, keep them fresh in your mind as we move through the panel here. And we're going to open up shortly afterwards for you all to talk more. Without much delay, I'm going to introduce our next panelist, Joanne Yaro. She is currently, many of you, if you are familiar with theater in this community, is the community engagement person for Syracuse Stage. But what you all may not know is that Joanne comes to this community with a robust experience in the arts, having served as a faculty member at various universities teaching theater and performance. She's also spent, prior to coming into Syracuse, 12 years running the Hispanic theater company in Miami, one of the only Spanish-speaking theater performance companies, professional companies in our nation. She not only has done that, but she has been a television show host. She's a film as well as theater writer, director, and producer who has done things the world over. And so we've asked Joanne to come in and speak with us today about what has her experience been as a Latina, performing in specific spaces, but also doing the work that is representative of the Latina experience through the arts and how that intersects with thinking about the experience of Latina women in the workplace, how we view them in our communities, and the challenges that they're facing.
Wanted to welcome everybody and thank you, Charlene, for that amazing presentation. A very hard act to follow, but I will do my best. And what I'm going to be doing is actually going to be a little bit more interactive. So I'm going to ask our participants to participate. So just a little bit about me, like Johanna mentioned, before coming to Syracuse, I ran a Spanish language conservatory and repertory in Miami, but I also was part of building their animation world as they started to bringing animation and film into Miami. And I also have an animation company. I also have my own company where I work with business partners. And part of that reason is because early on, I started working with high school students who wanted to be artists. Now, if your kid came up to you tomorrow and said, "Mom, Dad, I want to be an actor," I'm sure your heart would glow. I'm sure you're thinking, "Oh, you're going to make so much money. Oh, I'm so happy for you," right? The security that I feel around that choice in your life. And part of the reason maybe why you don't feel that is because you don't think about the arts as a business venture. And I think that that's I'm going to talk a little bit today about personality, about mythology, and about storytelling. So I started a group with high school students called Artpreneurs. I'm very interested, and part of the reason I've been able to work in the arts for 30 years is because I also think of the arts as an entrepreneurial business, as a way to not only share my stories, but also to work within the community to share their stories, and also to say, this is something people want to hear, this is something that people will pay for, this is something that people will support. Because once they start to see that we need to take care of the storytellers in our community, because without them, who is going to narrate our existence? Who is going to narrate what happened here in this year, 100 years from now, right? Who is going to say, where did I take care of the storyteller so that my story has been narrated? Even this moment that we're talking about right now, that is dealing with the data that we're dealing with, part of that comes also from the people who say, I had to tell my story. I had to give my story even to the census, for example. So when working with these high school students about how do I kind of combine entrepreneurship with art, right? How do I combine these two things together and look at being an artist, but also being an entrepreneur? And basically teaching these young artists, you have to reach out to the business community. You have to figure out how to make a business plan. You have to figure out how to make a marketing plan. You have to figure out what your life is going to look like 5 years, 10 years, and your retirement from now. So all of these things being said, and I'm kind of diverging a little bit from the topic, I started to also work in the business community. Because one of the things that happens is, where do you in the business community get stuck in, how do I find a way to get all of these things that I need to get done, but I can't work within the rubric that I have been given. Where is the space for creativity? Where is the space for innovation, right? And where can I start to look at things differently or have a different perspective? Because insanity, right, is what? We are trying to solve the same problem, but we're doing it in the, we're solving it in the exact same way. So, so one of the things that I always say to Johanna, we've talked a lot about this, as the first myth that I come across is, I really wanted to be an artist, but I didn't want to be a starving artist. And I always say to her, honey, I need to go on a diet. There's nothing starving about me, right? And so really trying to look at, there is a way to bring community together. It is when we start to silo, in ourselves, that we start to say, I am alone. I'm doing this all by myself, whether it's trying to start a business, trying to become an artist, or trying to feel that I am the only person in my job that looks like me. I feel alone. I am siloed. Where is my community? So now getting on to topic, which is about women and about being in the workforce and being Latina and all that fun stuff. I wanted to talk a little bit about what we think about the psychology of women, what we think about when we think about women. So this is the participatory part of my thing. So I'd like for you guys to put in the chat, when you think about women's personalities in the workforce, put just a word or words or whatever. When you think about women and their personality, what are some of the words that come to mind? I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to throw those in as I keep chatting along. Or what do you think people think about your personality in the workforce if you're a woman in the workforce? When you think about these things or what you feel like you need to be, right? Good. What I found very interesting, so the other part of what I do is I have a company called Distinctive Voices, and it was working with CEOs and working with different business organizations to develop speaking and listening skills. But what I found more and more and more was that women in powerful positions were coming up to me and saying, I really need your help because I'm the only woman walking into this boardroom. And everybody thinks that I'm fierce, strong, collaborated, dedicated. But what I really feel is insecure. I feel like each one of my words is being measured. Each one of my words is being judged. I feel like, should I wear this necklace with these earrings and this sweater? Is my hair too curly? Should I have straightened it out? These are all the things that are entering into that meeting, right? Before we even say word one. Right? All of a sudden, Johanna, you mentioned hair, right? But imagine if you're saying, is my hair too kinky today? Should I have straightened it today? Do I sound funny? Oh my God, I'm stumbling. Oh my God, they looked at me funny. And all of these things are going in our head because we know that people have a very specific way of thinking about how women in the workforce, what personalities they should have. Now, when you think about men, do you think about their personality or do you think about what their job is? I'm just going to let that sink, right? When you think about women in the workforce, do you think about their personality? Are they going to be tough to deal with? Is this woman tough as nails? Or is she just sweet, or their work, right? So one of the things that as we are looking at each other in the workforce, ask yourself, am I looking at this person because of the work that they're doing or because of the personality that I need them or expect them to be? Or I have to work with them because of their personality, not because of their work. Okay, so the next part is, I just have another quick question for you. It says, how likely are you to criticize a woman in the workforce? Whether you're criticizing her job performance or whether you're criticizing the way she looks, right? How likely are you to criticize a woman in the workforce? Where do you feel that you have license or agency to do that, right? And so again, think about this. somebody comes up to you and you easily or more quickly say, you know, I wouldn't have worn that sweater today. How likely are you to do that for your male counterpart? And a little bit about this is you are now dealing with, I can talk to this woman because I'm not talking to her as an employee, I'm talking to her personality, right? So again, think of things that to think about a little bit. And then my final question, I'm gonna add it first to a little story. For those women that are in this panel, what have you had to do that's crazy to show that you had to prove you could do it? And I'm going to give a quick little story. So when I interviewed for this job in Miami to be the artistic director of a school, I was running a huge project. The day of my interview was the date, it just so happened that my second child decided to be born that morning, right? She was born at 6 a.m. My interview was at 3 p.m. Do you think I missed my interview? I didn't. I don't even remember what I said in that interview, but I was not going to let them know that just because I had a baby that morning, I was going to miss the interview, right? So when you think about this and you're saying, Joanne, that's absolutely crazy. But at the time, it wasn't. At the time, I had to say to myself, I'm strong enough. I can do this better than anybody else, right? So when you think about it, think about what are some of the things, even the crazy things that you've had to do to say, I'm going to prove that I can do this. I'm going to drive across town in 5 minutes when it's an hour away, right? I can juggle, especially I can see these women on Zoom, the baby and the board meeting, right? When do we give ourselves space to say, hey, I have a baby and I'm on Zoom, so you have to deal. And it's okay. We laugh when we see the baby interrupting the male counterpart. We get frustrated when we see that the woman can't handle between the baby and the Zoom meeting, right? So again, just things to think about. If you want to share any stories, I would love to see them or hear them. And finally, you know, Juhanna talked a little bit about race and being Latina and being all of these things. Now, part of my background is I've also very much like Johanna lived all over the world. I lived in Asia, I lived in Latin America, I've lived here. And so when it comes to race for me personally, part of what I find very interesting is when we're talking about race, we're actually talking about culture. It's not because for me specifically, you can be African American, you can be Jamaican American, you can be Afro-Cuban, right? You can be Afro-Colombian, right? Just the idea of being Latino or being of darker melanin doesn't mean that we're all clumped in the same socio-psychological world. A lot about who we are comes from who we are culturally. So a lot about that is finding out what our specific culture is. And again, this works both ways, right? My name is Joanne Yaro. What you don't know is that there's a Maria in the middle, which I had to put in when I lived in Miami, because Joanne Yaro is a very Anglo name. And they didn't believe, just based on my name, that I was Hispanic, right? And at the same time, you know, I one of the things that I also do is I, you know, help interpret for people, and really looking at, just because I'm Hispanic, you know, I'm not Mexican, right? I'm not Puerto Rican, right? What does it mean to know that, okay, here's Joanne, she's from Colombia. What does that mean? What does that look like? And really looking at not just what we are here or what our names are, but what are the cultural sensibilities that we have for each other? How does that work when we're working with other people? It's, you know, we talk a lot about inclusion, but the problem that I have with inclusion is sometimes inclusion suggests integration. We all have to act the same. We all have to have the same culture in the workforce, which is really hard because obviously a dominant culture will take place, right? A dominant way of working will take place. And what I want to kind of, you know, introduce or suggest, and what has worked for me in the workforce, is a celebration of culture as opposed to an integration of culture. How amazing is it that I have a woman from India working with me? And what is her culture? And let's invite her family over. And what are some of the things that she can actually bring to this company? What are some of the things that the way she thinks about that world? Again, going back to how do we look at this in a more international perspective? And international doesn't mean that just because her family is from India doesn't mean she knows anything about India. She might have been born here and her parents might have been born here, but there is a cultural way and an idea of being in the space and saying, I also have something to bring to the table, but we might have to approach it in a culture that we're not used to. Which brings me to kind of the finalization of this. So after working in Miami with a lot of people from Latin America, I come to Syracuse. Now in Miami, if you don't kiss everybody, it is the worst offense on the planet. I had to learn that no matter who walked in through the door, you had to give them a kiss and you had to come in, and especially if it was somebody in a position above you. You can imagine my shock coming to Syracuse where nobody kisses each other here, and I just don't understand why, right? And many times I would go to lean in and somebody would give me their hand and I would cut myself off and go, oh, yes, this is how it culturally works in Syracuse, right? That even in the business community, because this is not an arts thing, this was a cultural thing, right? I'm cutting myself off. Now we've kind of come to a cool medium where people know, oh, that's Joanne, you need to kiss her, right? Or obviously now in COVID, nobody kisses me, but whatever. But the idea that even saying hello to somebody has a way to understand where they come from, whether it's, if you're dealing with somebody, whether hello is a bow, or whether you're dealing with somebody who, if they're French and they kiss 3 times, right? Where do we find the celebration in each other? And as opposed to trying to forcing each other to integrate with each other and trying to find this workplace that is only one monolithic culture. So, so that's, I know that we have a very short time, so I'm going to leave those questions and we can move on, Johanna.
Thank you, Joanne. I think really interesting points, I think, that follow up the points that Charlene raised, because for me, if many folks that are here today were at our previous section, Dr. Jackson talked about a culture of belonging. And I think part of what Joanne's points is leading me to think about is how do we take the culture, thinking about women, thinking about how they show up in rooms and the ways in which one's cultural or ethnic or racial background shapes their understanding of what welcoming can mean, right? As we add on to ways in which we can think about women and gender and race in the workplace. So for our last finalist, and then I'm really eager to get us opened up to questions, but I want to give her time. It's Dr. Malika Carter. For those of you that have not met her, you should definitely spend time. She's another dynamic woman that's here in our community. She joined ESF back in August of 2017. I remember when she first started as their first chief diversity officer. Prior to serving at ESF, Dr. Carter founded a social justice consulting firm, Passion for Pivot, and served as the chief diversity officer for the city of Worcester, Massachusetts. So for folks that are thinking, you know, a lot of these positions are new, they've been around for quite a while, but I think we're highlighting them in different ways, more so recently. In addition to that, she's also had 2 appointments since being here. She was also helping lead as Chief Diversity Officer and Institutional Equity Officer and Title IX Coordinator for Upstate Medical University. She has over 15 years experience developing policies and initiatives that address inclusion, diversity, and equity. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Dr. Malika Carter.
Dr. J, thank you. And thank you to my fellow panelists. I cannot tell you how delighted I am to be here. And so I really appreciate the things that have been said before me, because they infuse in my mind that I am saying the right thing. So I'm grateful. And I want to begin by giving honor to where honor is due, because I honestly can say this, because we're on a panel talking about women and race. I would not be speaking with you today had it not been for someone 1, 2, 3 blocks away from me on my Zoom screen, and that's Charlene Tarver. And I'm saying that because when just off being homeless and also walking into a community that I did not know in Phoenix, Arizona, my dad was looking through the paper and he said, "You need to call this lady. You need to call her. She has something you need to know," because he knew that I had all this education, all this passion. Hence why I call my business Passion for Pivot. And I went to a Charlene Tarver who showed me the way. And that's what I want to begin with, because that is something that has infused for me over the course of my career and was with me prior to that. So if I haven't said thank you to Charlene Tarver, thank you very much. I appreciate you. I'm grateful that you are doing this work and continuing on in it, as we have heard in your presentation. So as the former Chief Diversity Officer for the City of Worcester, as CDO and doing other roles for Upstate and ESF, or Environmental Science and Forestry, as we lovingly call it, and then having a social justice consulting firm, Passion for Pivot, I have been exposed to a lot. I have been exposed to that as a world trekker. As a former Rotarian and traveling to do service. And it has shown me that this concept that we're talking about today is multi-layered and also is applicable to various different industries. And so I'm very grateful for all of you on this call today as you have come to learn. And I hope that what was said already, you have learned something about. Just a little bit about the State University of New York. New Yorkers, all New Yorkers live within 30 miles of one of SUNY's 64 colleges and universities. And across the system, there are academic health centers, 5 hospitals, 4 medical schools, 2 dental schools, and the state's only optometry school. And it's managed by a lot of different people. So this means not only do we have access to helping the future of education, but we also have access to the individuals that are working to help that future, our employees. So I'm going to tell you 4 things the mentor told me, and I want you to write them down. All right, here you go. Because it's going to be hard to do if you don't write it down. It's I'm okay, you're okay. That's the first one. The second one is I'm not okay, you're not okay. The third one, I'm okay, you're not okay. And then the fourth and the last one is I'm not okay, you're not okay. I want those things to stay in your mind as I speak, because I try to operate in such a way where I'm okay and the other person is okay. And I do that because many times when I walk into a room, we talked about visibility and we know visibility matters. We talked about visibility in a lot of different aspects. And so I wanted you to know that it's important to make sure that you recognize what you show up as well as recognizing what other people show up as, and then honoring both of those. Right. So I say that because I don't want anyone to walk away from this conversation feeling disenfranchised. Ms. Yarrow just talked about what it means to be in a dominant group. And so what it means to be in a dominant group can change depending on what environment you may find yourself in. And many of us who have traveled abroad definitely know this. So it makes a big difference. When I ask you something, rhetorical question, this is a dynamic for a dominant group, and I want you to think the other way. What would this mean for a subordinate group? So if the dynamic of a dominant group, they have greater access to resources, power, and privilege. What does that mean? You heard some of what Attorney Tarver had to say about how individuals can be disenfranchised based on identity. And I want you to think about that. What does that mean for the exact opposite? So if you're a subordinate identity, does that mean you have lesser or none? What does that mean? Access to resources, power, and privilege. 1964, if you Google this, by the way, you're in a virtual environment, so you probably could. And that is, you'll see a president, he's bending over a table, he's signing something. And this was the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Right behind him, and I like to laugh about this, was the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. peering over his shoulder. I think that he was making sure that he signed it. And what that meant was that we said as a nation that we no longer, on the basis of race, we're going to discriminate against individuals. Now, we have movements such as the women's movement, the LGBTQIA movement, and the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so now each of you, within each of your entities, you have what we call a non-discrimination statement. If you don't, I encourage you to check and get one done. And so that non-discrimination statement says that we don't discriminate based on what we call protected classes, age, race, gender, you know them, right? All of these different things. So if we don't, by the way, Title IX says that legislation says now that we don't discriminate based on gender. So if we don't, why is it that all of these disparities continue to happen? If institutions, which we are all a part of, by the way, you are, because all from cradle to grave, we're all a part of institutions, whether that be K-12, whether that be faith-based, whether that be organizations, Lions Club, Rotary Club, Seroptimus Club, whatever that may be, whatever your affiliations are, they serve as gates. It could be higher education, it could be SUNY in and of itself. They serve as gates to open up and close, right? So when we talk about, and you've heard all these statistics, and you know what the state of the matter is, you know how dire it is. Why don't we have an awakening that we need to make sure that we don't invite other people into institutions? Why is it that it's so hard for us to infiltrate and change institutions? Well, the answer is human will. And because we don't have the human will, because people are normalizing the way things have been, it's very difficult for other people to break into it. Think about like guilds, right? Unions. It's very difficult. So humans, we behave this way, all right? And so here's some things that began to transform institutions. Individuals like me who are willing to say bold things and are hired because of all of the different things, that history that has come before me. I am emboldened to be able to say, you know what? We have a childcare desert in Syracuse. So if that's the case, then how is it that a person that's traditionally taking care of their family is then able to work, right? And in such a way that uninterrupted, where they can contribute as an employee. It takes a person like me to be able to say, you know what? We need an employee resource group. If you don't know what that is, there's different affiliations or affinities, if you will, of individuals based on similar same identity that gather as part of their employment experience in order to deepen what that employer can do for them. Doesn't have to be like we need more money now. No, it could be something as simple as, you know what? We're mothers, we need a lactation room. By the way, do you know what a lactation room is? Google it, you'll find it. So I wanted to also share with you some of the other things that I've been able to do in order to make the environment a little bit better. One is to write a grant called Prodigy, and it's promoting this idea of getting more women and domestic people of color into the workforce as faculty members all throughout SUNY. So I'm very, very delighted to say that ESF has been a part of that, and all other of the 64 schools have participated in writing grants. It stands for Promoting Recruiting Opportunity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Growth. And if you're interested in taking a peek at it, it's just suny.edu/PRODIG. I also have at ESF, because I saw that we didn't have any. By the way, we didn't really have a recruitment plan for domestic people of color. And I say that domestic people of color very deliberately, because there are a lot of domestic people of color that live underneath or the bridge, literally, and down the hill from all of these higher education institutions and other institutions on the hill. And so we did our very level best to talk about that, but at a certain point you need to activate. And so there's different types of things that I have started, student programs, employee resource groups, and I didn't do it alone. I did it by going to other passionate people who cared about it, and then pulling together all the resources. And if I don't know, I'm telling you, if women don't do this, I don't know what. I'm going to tell you a really short story. I was having a conversation with an aunt, my great aunt. And so I was sitting in legs akimbo inside of the house between the living room and the kitchen. And I keep looking at the TV, I keep looking. And all of a sudden I see this line. And so all the men are sitting, this is Thanksgiving, all the men are sitting in the living room, all the women in the kitchen, right? And so I'm a non-traditionalist, so that's why I was sitting in the middle. So I said, Aunt Vi, something's wrong with the TV. All the men in the living room roared their laughter. How was I supposed to know that this was the first down line? I don't know. So now I can't talk sports with my family. They tease me about it, but it forced me to think that I'm a non-traditionalist and I ask questions, even if it seems obvious. So I just wanted to point out a couple other things to you. And doing this because it is important I can't leave here without telling you how important I think public education is. So the chancellor of SUNY system just came out with what is called the SUNY Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Phase 1 Action Plan. And as a part of this action plan, it reads, if America's public colleges and universities are going to be true democratic engines for opportunity and social mobility, then their student body and graduates should at least mirror the racial and ethnic demographics in the state in which they reside. Public institutions should reduce rather than exacerbate race-based inequalities and advance the public interest. And I'll end with that. And so by making sure that you know that, my hope is that you know that one of the answers to the solutions that we are trying to get at right now is educating people. You can't uneducate somebody who already knows. So it's important for us to do that. Slide, please, just a few. I'm going to share these slides with you because I like giving resources. You already know that I have been a beneficiary of resources. So every time I get something in my hand, I try to give it away. In my role at both ESF as well as Upstate Medical University, I helped to develop something called the Reach Out apps. These are free. That's what I'm telling you. Free 50. You didn't hear me. Free 50. So you can utilize these and you just call or just send an email to the Reach Out editions. You can get access to them if you use the Apple or Android, either or. And so individuals are able to, you can design this any way you want to as a login. You can change the icons. We used ours traditionally to address Title IX, so sexual assault, sexual discrimination, sexual harassment, but now it's exploded. So we've used it for a lot of different other things. Next slide, please. So this is what it looks like at both. And so please do take advantage of utilizing this for your institution. If you think, nobody's going to use that, you would be pleasantly surprised or sadly surprised, either way, that people really do need resources. How can you effectively have people in place at an institution if you don't give them what they need? You don't send a cook to dig a ditch, and you don't send somebody to pick apples that grows oranges. You have to give people what they need according to their identity. This is important. In your non-discrimination statement, you have all those protected class identities. You have to make sure you talk to people and they have to know you're talking to them. So if you put something out blanket, oh yeah, that's nice, great. But unless I know you're talking to me, I'm not going to take advantage of it. So please do tailor this if you are adopting it and making sure that different under historically absent or historically marginalized groups know that you're speaking with them. Next slide, almost done. This is an example of speaking of who you are talking to. The ESF Women's Caucus, my office and a lot of others, we put together exactly where things are regarding gender inclusive restrooms. If you don't know, I think it was last year, the Gender Expression Non-Discrimination Act in New York came to be. This means that we have to do certain things to make sure that people who are different genders or who do not identify on the gender binary are knowledgeable about things. So I just wanted to show you that. If you need a copy of this, take a screenshot or I can send it to you. Next slide, please. So remember what I said about lactation rooms, giving people what they need. We make sure that individuals, at institutions where I'm going, I make sure that folks know about what the standards are for the United States if they're nursing. Next slide. Last one. Just wanted to show you this so you would be able to see it. There are other different types of standards for other different identities of people. If you don't know what those are, please ask somebody at your institution or entity like myself, or ask a human resources professional. There are several different, and you can do a lot of good by deepening the sense of belonging that women and people of color have, particularly women of color. And if you only speak to them and give them what they need to thrive. You've heard some of the problems, now you have some of the solutions. Not all of them, but hopefully I'm leaving you with some of the solutions that you can implement. Thank you very much. I appreciate the time today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carter. I'm not gonna belabor the too many points, but I just want to do some high level, just sort of kind of sum ups. One, I had no idea of the relationship between Attorney Tarver and Dr. Carter. And so I was blown away once I realized that the two of them have been connected. So that is amazing to see. And I think one of the things when we talk about how do we address challenges related to women, their role in the workplace, I know we've had these conversations, is the importance of mentorship. Right? The importance of having someone that you can call on to talk through issues, to ask the questions, even how to use some of the resources if we all start to think about how we can display them, as Dr. Carter put out. But I think also to the point that Joanne raised in the conversation she and I have a lot, having someone to bounce your ideas off of, to affirm that you belong there, has really been a critical part of my development. But I also know for women, even when you start shattering the ceilings as we're doing, it's important that workspaces and places are thinking about how do we continue to support the promotion, development, and intentional mentorship of women in general, but also diverse women bodies, right? As we're trying to figure out and navigate some of the nuances of different races, cultures, and ethnicities. I'm gonna throw a question out to the panelists, and then for all of our attendees today, I would encourage you to start putting some of your questions in the chat. We're gonna choose some of those, or if you wanna come off of mute and ask your question, this is gonna be a great time to do it. So I think for our panelists, you all have hit on some really, really critical points, I think, for all of us to think about. If there was one thing that you wanted folks to take away from the discussion today, and hopefully that one thing would be to act in some form to address some of the challenges or barriers for women. I know it's unfair to ask for one thing, but what is that action or thought that you would want to leave with the panelists? I also would like to highlight before, as they prepare to answer, that you know, I often reach out to folks that are connected with CenterState or we have a relationship with, but many of these women are connected to our community, and I'm just so excited about that. So thank you for the work that you're doing and just being present in a similar space as us. So, you know, you should be seeing them again in different ways, but go ahead, Attorney Tarver.
Okay, so I'm just going to jump in. I want to start by saying, first of all, Dr. Carter, thank you so much. I am so humbled by you. I actually had no idea that you were in Syracuse. You are a joy and a true pleasure. I appreciate you, and I look forward to breaking bread with you when I arrived in Syracuse. I think for me, the one takeaway, Dr. Carter actually hit that proverbial nail on the head, and that is empowering women and creating opportunities for women. I met Dr. Carter through a CDBG grant, Community Development Block Grant. Our law firm at that time was a law firm that I was the principal of, actually received the grant through the city of Phoenix, and we were able to work with women entrepreneurs that were located in census tract areas. And so everything from, you know, actually forming their legal entity to walking them through their business plan, putting together, if they had a corporation, kind of their articles of incorporation, helping them with how they build out their governance structure, board management, how do you actually monetize your actual service or product. And we actually did a series of educational sessions in the community around really women starting businesses. And so that's something that I feel very passionate about. I also have taken that into the college classroom in the community college system. And so working with our business entrepreneurial students and really helping students understand how you form businesses. I had my own personal experiences and professional experiences. A lot of times women have the technical skill, but may not have the back office administrative experience. And so teaching women how to run and manage offices, you know, how do you read a profit and loss statement? How do you kind of project out what your inventory needs are going to be? Do you need to have a bricks and mortar versus some sort of online venue? How do you package, market, promote, distribute products? What does that actually look like? How do you galvanize and engage staff? Are you going to have employees or independent contractors? What's the difference between the tax and the tax liability of a C Corp versus an LLC? And so really educating women and helping them understand that. And then really working more specifically with women of color, because we see that entrepreneurism is one of the fastest ways to actually create generational wealth. Right there in Syracuse, Syracuse is a Rust Belt city. Syracuse has moved from this, kind of this blue collar mass production environment. We are now post-industrial, or Syracuse is post-industrial. And so how do you begin to create pathways to wealth for women and for communities and communities of color specifically? And so entrepreneurism is a way of doing that, and also the mentoring. And so I again, thank you, Dr. Carter, for that. But I think that kind of paints the picture that we're trying to communicate. And that is that women build these lifelong sustainable relationships just by being mentored directly or indirectly by others.
I'm just going to build off of that because I think for me, the takeaway is giving space to women's voices. And that is a really important thing. One of the things that I was able to do with you, Johanna, early pandemic was when you came and we brought a gathering place to Syracuse Stage. And I think for the first time, what happened was that just giving all those women that space to speak what they were going through in the workforce, what they were going through in their families, what they were going through, all of a sudden we get to see their humanity, and we get to see that they are dealing with children or with siblings, or you don't know what's behind the curtain, right? And how do you support women who are also dealing with ideas of self-judgment? Because I think I love the idea of the affinity groups that Dr. Malika talked about, like having the space to just be yourself. I think is so important, to find people who are like, that you can connect to, that you don't have to perform for. And because even though I'm in theater, what I'm finding more and more with different people of different cultures is that they're having to perform, that they're doing more acting at work that I'm doing on my stage, right? And and that's exhausting when it's every single day, right? So where do you give the space to just be? I think that that's important, because otherwise it's a kettle that'll steam over, and that will affect your businesses at the end of the day. And I love the idea of pathways to wealth. One of the things I'm writing a book with Diane McGraw, who's actually Tim McGraw's the stepmother right now, about women in entrepreneur positions in the entertainment industry. And one of the things I realized with talking with these other women is that, they say money can't buy happiness, wealth can't buy happiness, but happiness attracts wealth. So if you're in a state, if your space is a space of I can, if you have gotten rid of the myth that starving artist, poverty, whatever it is, all of those things are labels on you that you either have to swallow, or you either have to say it doesn't apply to me, because I know that there's a purpose for me. And this is how the impossible becomes possible. And this is how you attract wealth and how you attract people to what you're doing.
I wanted to share that there are less individuals coming to college that are of traditional identity. And I'll be specific with what I mean by that. Historically speaking, we have seen higher education institutions, approximately 4,500 across the US, that have welcomed in individuals that identify as either and or both white and male. 18 to 25 years ago, because of the sexism that many women were experiencing, and this includes white women, they were choosing to not have children in deference to their careers. And we call this the delayed baby boom. So what this means is that there are higher education institutions who recognize this, and they're scrambling. They're scrambling to prepare individuals that are coming through K through 12. They're scrambling to provide services and resources to individuals in ways that they never have before. This is an opening for all of us. This opening will not only improve equity rates for everyone, but it will also change the course of what people think is an educated person, right? Just like you would ask the child, close your eyes, think about what a police officer looks like, right? Close your eyes, think about what a construction worker looks like. What does a teacher look like? We have an opportunity here to change the trajectory of lived understanding, what people think and think they know about a particular experience. Here's why I'm saying that. It was Shirley Chisholm who said, you don't make progress by standing on the sidelines, whimpering and complaining. You make progress by implementing ideas. So what I beseech you to do is to utilize the ideas, such as if you don't have an ERG, create one. Such as if you don't have data like what's presented today, ask for it, present it in your space, right? Share with people, negotiate how to change the reality so that we don't have to have conversations about deficits anymore. Instead, we will be having a discussion about, I don't know, who's going to go to the moon first. By the way, that was a thing now. Did you see that? So we have lots more as a human family to get to besides the disenfranchisement that comes along with historical difference. We got a long way to go. Thank you, Dr. Rogers.
No, thank you, Dr. Carter. We have a long way to go, and I know I see some of the faces on the screen as I'm panning through for those that have their camera on, and I see people taking notes and they're thinking. And so we have about 10 minutes left. And so is there a courageous person that is a part of this human family? I love that, that's willing to come on and put their voice in the space and take up space and ask our panelists a question or just share some thoughts that they're thinking about. I know I feel empowered as a woman today, sitting on this panel, but maybe some of you are also thinking about some points that you can take away from this space today. And who?
Dr. Rogers, my name is Sue, and I want to thank all the panelists today because this has been just wonderful to listen to you. And what, we all as women know, I think, but listening to all of you today, it became so much clearer in my own mind that as a professional woman, the things that have been barriers to me, whereas when in my office, my counterparts view me as, oh, she has children, that's a negative. We might train her and then she'll go have another baby, that's a negative. She, feels that she's not confident in herself because she always has to ask other people, for help or their opinions. And when I hear those things, I think to myself, people are looking at that through the wrong lens. In reality, those exact attributes are the things that make women so valuable. Because when you have a child, you have got to be the best organized problem solver who can multitask. And when you started and you said, you see these women on Zoom calls with a baby, yeah, do you ever see men doing that? And I apologize to my counterparts who are on the call, but the reality is that's a huge asset that taught me how to be all of those things. And I bring that to the table. And I have found in my life, before I became a professional, the best way for me to solve problems is to be collaborative. And so seeking out my best friend's advice or sharing a set of facts with people and saying, what do you think? Always created a better outcome when I was willing to listen to other people. And so I don't view that as not being confident in myself. I view that as that's smart of me to be gathering as much input as I can to produce the greatest product for my client or for my work environment or for whatever the case may be. So, I've lived this for, however many years I've been doing this, 25, 30 years, but hearing you today just makes it so much clearer for me. And so I walk away thinking, I'm going to try to change the narrative. I'm going to try to turn those negatives into a positive lens, because really, I think that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to thank you for clarifying.
Absolutely. I wanted to jump in and just say, Sue, thank you for those comments, and all of the panelists. As Dr. J said, I was born and raised in Syracuse, grew up on the South Side. I left Syracuse almost 33 years ago, went off to college, law school, and then moved out to the West Coast, and then came back to the East Coast and did an advanced degree at a couple of degrees at Georgetown. My father had a third grade education. My father was one of the Southern migrants that Southern folks who migrated to the North or to Syracuse from Alabama. And so I would implore each of you to, really dig deep as you are meeting people with different cultural backgrounds and different perspectives and views and values, really digging within yourself to understand difference and to embrace difference. But I think also treating people with a level of decency, dignity, and respect. Part of the reason I do the work that I do around equity is because we know that women of color are unemployed, underemployed, and employed at poverty level wages. And this isn't about inability or unwillingness to pursue education. We strongly value, I know in my family, we strongly value education, as do many of the African-American women that I've encountered and women of color. The challenge is that oftentimes the opportunities are not there, the promotions are not there, the measuring stick is so severely blemished in terms of the bias. And so really creating this space where women can have an opportunity to compete and the playing field can be level so that you as business owners, as companies, as colleagues, as managers are able to get the best product. Part of what I teach students is the value of emotional and conversational intelligence and how to work in teams and build teams, because the end goal is to build the best product or service. And we do that by having the best minds that are prepared to go to work. And that is that can be accomplished irrespective of race or irrespective of color or creed or all of these differences, because ultimately what people have is the ability and the desire to win, right? To win. Everybody wants to feed their family. We all want the same thing. So how do we create an environment that congeals us as a community, congeals us as a company, and really pushes and propels our teams forward?
Yeah, and I just wanted to build upon that, and also what Dr. Carter said about education and about opportunities and about resources. I'm working on a animated piece about important women in history, but when they were 11. So what kind of girls was Harriet Tubman, was Rosa Parks, was Frida Kahlo? And what we discovered is two things. Number one is that in that very fragile age of 11, 12, 13, that's the part where they have to trust their grit, right? That's the part where they were challenged and they said, okay, I'm going to do it. But just understand that in that moment, that these fragile moments in that K through 12 education is where are we empowering these girls' grit. And then the other thing that we discovered in our research is the important role that men have in these women's lives, in these young girls' lives, whether it's a father or a father figure, right? Because the father or the father figure looked at them as equals, looked at them as you can, right? And this starts at a very early age, because one of the things that we want to be able to erase is to be able to walk into that boardroom and not have all our history walk in with us, all our insecurities walk in with us. And that, again, using that education, using those resources, I think is just so important to build tribe. We need to lift each other, and we're all in this. So yeah.
Thank you. Trust your grit. Also trust their grit. Love that. Love that. We all have the power to win. Creating and utilizing resources. Hopefully, I know I'm walking away today feeling more empowered. And let me just say this. Each of these women, Joanne, I probably talk to more frequently. Attorney Tarver, I've spoken to once. Dr. Malika Carter, I remember the day she started. We don't see each other pretty frequently, but are in connection. And when we talked about putting this panel together, I could have come on and talked with you all for an hour and a half and had slides, but I said, no, I'm going to reach out to other dynamic women who are doing amazing work, provide a platform for them to talk about how they're addressing these issues as a matter of working in collaboration with my peers and women that I respect and admire their work, and I can also learn something from. And I share that to say, each of you are going to go back into your workspaces today. And I want to challenge you all to think about who's a woman, as Attorney Tarver pointed out, who's a woman that we can partner with as a vendor? Who's a woman that maybe needs some mentorship that we can provide and have her reach out to Dr. Carter or Joanne or someone within the community, and we can help make that connection. What is our approach to engaging women in the workplace? Have we identified safe spaces for women or other affinity groups within our organization and created a map similar to what Dr. Carter did or what her institution is doing? Can we contact her to talk about those things? Can we think about how we can support the development of Syracuse women and their efforts around entrepreneurship? We should have a conversation with Attorney Tarver about that, or think about creative ways of coaching and empowering women and reaching out to Joanne to do that. I say those things because I want you all to walk away today thinking of an action and empowered to do something. Don't just come to the session and learn something, and I know we're at time, but hopefully something today has empowered you to not only feel good or got a message that can help you move forward, but is also gonna do what Shirley Chisholm challenges us all to do, but to not stand on the sidelines, but pull up a chair to the table, be a part of the conversation, and if you're not, then build your own damn table. Excuse my French. Thank you for your time, attention, and engagement today. And here's here to women in the workplace doing amazing things. Thank you.